There is a fourth sub out there. Is that something that you want to speak to? So should we move that right now?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'll go to Senator Grover.
Yes, thank you, Senator Johnson. There's a fourth sub on the system, so all of you in the audience and in the committee. And this it doesn't change the bill, but it does make some changes to some of the issues we've been working through with our various partners. And so there's a few components that we want to talk about, but that will be the nature of it, and then Representative Hall can speak to the entirety of the bill. So the fourth sub includes language, and we're talking about academic freedom. We work with USHE, and they want to make sure to include inviting speakers to campus. So we just want to make sure that speakers of either side, if there's such a thing, are able to come and speak, and so we make sure that's in the bill, made abundantly clear, that nothing gets in the way of that practice. Then we define governmental interest, and that's on line 172, I think it is. And we define that to mean governmental purpose relating to athletic competition or athletic safety and public education or privacy. I'm not sure of the line, but we also addressed an issue at the University of Utah. They already have a contract agreement with the Ute Indian tribe, and so we make sure that this legislation does not interfere with that already agreed upon a contract. Those are the big rocks. We also have some language that we've actually omitted and introduced on behalf of our K-12 partners that they wanted to see in the bill. And so we also worked on that language, and that is the fourth sub. And of course, Representative Hall will explain the bill once we get into the nuts and bolts.
So do you want to move that sub?
So my motion is to move substitute 4 without explanation.
Okay, so the motion on the table is to delete title and body of HB261 substitute 3 and replace it with HB261 substitute 4. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll come back to you to sum.
Yeah, and again, this represents a lot of work that's been done with all of the stakeholders and accommodating language so we can get this bill as near to acceptable as we can for all of the stakeholders involved. So that's my sum.
Okay, so the motion on the table is to delete title and body of HB 261 substitute 3 and replace it with HB 261 substitute 4. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the chair rules that is unanimous. Okay, now you're speaking to the fourth substitute. Go ahead, Representative Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As Senator Grover said, that sub comes with a lot of work over the last week as we've heard from more stakeholders and tried to help with the adjustments of the language. So I appreciate that. Thank you. So as HB 261 accomplishes 3 main goals. It focuses on removing barriers and ensuring fairness to all students so that all students can succeed with their hard work. It guarantees higher education institutions remain a free marketplace of ideas and knowledge and protect free speech and open dialogue on campus. It ensures common sense policies in state agencies and higher ed institutions by no longer requiring applicants to provide submissions or attend trainings that promote political ideologies. It prevents discriminatory practices based on an individual's race, color, ethnicity, sex, sexual orientation, national origin, age, religion, or gender identity. I've been working hard on this bill for over a year now, and the genesis of it comes from students and many professors who have reached out to me with concerns about the landscape of some of our higher ed institutions. Professors have expressed worry about their students and their profession as they see a decline in student engagement and in an environment where so many are afraid to speak up for fear of losing their jobs, getting censured, being harassed, being doxxed. These employees point to the ideological commitment statements as just a part of the problem because there's little diversity of viewpoint within the faculty and virtually no willingness to hire anyone who won't think the same as the majority view. The University of Utah has already said that they're not going to ask for these ideological statements, so the first section of this bill just enforces that in code throughout the state at all of our higher ed institutions. This bill is focused on removing barriers for all students and Utahns who overcome adversity through hard work, initiative, and talent. University professors, most of them, when they were talking to me, they said, these are their words, I'm a lifelong Democrat, lifelong liberal. I believe in diversity. I believe in all of these things, but I have a serious concern with the landscape of what's happening here. They've expressed worry and fear for their jobs and fear for their students and whether their students are learning and engaging and progressing. We've seen some of this, some of the more divisive things, it seems, evidence more recently on our university campuses. We've seen has been some demonstrations on a couple of them, and then there was one panel discussion last summer where students turned their backs every time one of the panel speakers wanted to speak, and I think this just speaks to kind of a larger problem of not being willing to engage in different opinions and different views. I know in producing, in some of the discussions that we've had, I've been asked about data and the data supporting this bill, and I guess I would submit that there's not been much data to support pushing what's some of the things that have happened in regards to these trainings and initiatives. One professor who reached out to me, who feels like she couldn't come and talk, asked me to read something. She said, I am a faculty member at one of the colleges here in the state of Utah and have many concerns about the DEI program being implemented in our colleges. The program divides and does not unite, and there is close to no research showing its benefits. For such a big program in school settings, we need a lot of research to show its value and need. Right now, we are simply using theory to prove that it works. My experience with my colleagues and college students is that it divides us and does not bring us unity, but instead it makes individuals feel as though they are walking on eggshells. This does not create a safe and enticing place to learn. I want my students to feel safe, but if we are teaching them that their neighbor is against them because of some subconscious bias about their skin or sexual orientation, then it teaches us not to trust each other, which is far from what teaching is and teaching peace. Lately, we all get trained on the DEI program about what other areas we need to improve on. We should be embracing the good in humanity and the natural tendency to want to make people safe. We need to try something that has this and shows benefits. So I've appreciated these professors who've reached out to me to recognize that students learn and develop their own beliefs by experiencing a diversity of opinions. These professors are saying we don't mind having more conservative views. We'd actually like that. We'd like the pushback. So our institutions our institutions of higher education play an important role in preparing our students to join the dynamic workforce, build strong communities, and engage effectively with our civic institutions. This bill does that in ways by removing barriers for all students who overcome diversity through hard work, initiative, and talent. I'm sorry, let me find my notes. The ways that in which it does it is it removes the diversity statements from all of higher education, public education, and through our governmental entities. It also states that we can't have mandatory trainings that focus on or that have prohibited discriminatory practices in them, and we outline the prohibited discriminatory practices. There is some reporting measures, and we can go through those if people have questions on them. And the last thing, we talked about how it will redirect some of these offices to be student success centers, and where all students who are at risk of not completing their higher education goals can go to receive the help they need. And that is kind of what the bill does. There's been a lot in the media about what this bill does, and I want to clarify some of the things that it doesn't do. It doesn't close cultural centers. It doesn't defund programs. It doesn't affect private scholarships. It does not exclude students who need extra services for their academic success, including those who are already receiving services. And it does not violate current state or federal laws that prohibit discrimination. I would argue that it helps that. And I have been working with James Evans, and I've asked him to come and speak to the bill right here.
Thank you. My name is James Evans, and I want to thank Representative Hall for sponsoring this bill. I know it has not been easy on her and many others, but as I said before in the House Committee, that nothing worth having is ever easy. And I want to speak to what this bill actually is there to accomplish in just a broader sense. Imagine this: it expands the opportunity for all students at risk of graduating from college or university for them to receive additional assistance based on their individualized needs, not based on a group identity, but on what their specific needs are. Currently, at the University of Utah, the graduation rate for whites is 68%, for blacks is 50%, for Native Americans is 45%. You can go on and on and on. And at some point, you have to ask yourself, are these universities actually focusing on the individualized needs to help ensure that those that are at risk of graduating get the resources that they need? This bill speaks, directly to that. It eliminates discrimination for or against anyone based on the personal identity characteristics that are outlined in the bill. And that speaks to the conservative belief about procedural fairness. And that means honest, open, and impartial rules are used. So you come to the table as you are, and if you need additional assistance, you get that. But the way that you are evaluated is based on your ability to perform, based on whatever the metrics are, as long as those metrics are honest, open, fair, and partial. And that's the goal that this bill seeks to get us to. It prohibits certain discriminatory practices as outlined on lines 168 to 211, which applies to higher ed, the state board, and all governmental entities. And I would encourage all those to read exactly what those discriminatory practices are and not just assume because they're outlined in the bill. And for the first time, and this is what's key, for the first time it requires a statewide climate survey of all Utah colleges and universities on the climate of that campus, which means freedom of expression, academic freedom, prohibited discrimination, sexual harassment, all of those things that can now be captured in the survey. And that information is not being siloed at the universities, but coming straight to the legislators, the policymakers. And that has never been done before. So when we talk about making sure that if there are any, quote, systemic issues, which you often hear, the only entity that can address systemic issues are policymakers who can actually get a global view of what's going on at colleges and universities. And that's the first time I've ever seen something like that happen. So this bill seeks to rebalance the approach towards helping to ensure equality of opportunity for all. And I would like to remind you of just the landscape we're in. I love history, so I went back and listened and read the transcripts from the debate on the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And remember, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibited discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. And then President Johnson in September 1965 issued an executive order in 11246 regarding this issue. And back during the debate of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the floor manager, Senator Hubert Humphrey, you might remember that name, he declared that the bill, quote, would prohibit preferential treatment for any particular group, adding, quote, I will eat my hat if this leads to racial quotas, end quote. HB261, 60 years later, is trying to honor that intent. So the claim that we often hear about institutional discrimination or racism, let's just quickly remind ourselves what that means and see how this comports with this bill. Institutional discrimination is if an organization refuses to hire people of a certain ethnicity or religion, that's considered institutional discrimination. Additionally, if a company or organization refuses to promote individuals of a certain family status despite being qualified for the position, that's also institutional discrimination. And then the other claim you hear against this bill is about institutional racism. So let's just remember what that means. Discrimination or unequal treatment on the basis of membership in a particular ethnic group, typically one that is a minority or marginalized, arising from systems, structures, or expectations that have become established within an institution or organization. This bill seeks to actually mitigate just that, to remove those barriers. So in closing, this bill actually eliminates the practice of any form of discrimination in the pursuit of ensuring equality of opportunity for all. So I would just like to summarize that this bill, again, focuses on the original intent of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And it's interesting how 60 years later, we're having this debate about the fact that some want to discriminate in order to justify discrimination. We need to move beyond that and go back to what the original intent is, which is to make sure everyone has an opportunity for equality of opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to thank James for that. He explains it so well. I'll conclude my presentation just by saying that I feel like this bill states that we need to look at each person as an individual, not just their outward characteristics, include all of their circumstances as well, including their outward characteristics, but not solely. I did my nursing school clinicals in inner city Milwaukee, and I saw a lot of poverty of all races and cultures there during my public health rotations. I learned critical thinking skills and learned to see the whole person as an individual and not judge someone based on their color of their skin or their outward their appearances or what their identity was. Critical thinking and the ability to talk about all these aspects of health and of what's going on in our communities helped me to be able to treat every one of my patients equally and give them the attention they deserve regardless of personal identity characteristics. These are the things that we want our students to learn in our higher ed institutions. There are things that affect a person's health that have to do with intergenerational poverty for sure. I readily saw that and see that, and we can and should do more to address that. This bill isn't going to solve those problems. This is a start. To me, this is a start. There's still so much work to do in our communities, and we need to be able to discuss problems and possible solutions openly and debate how can best help. I'm committed to continue to work with the people in my low-income and minority communities who've reached out to me, some who support this bill and some who don't, but to continue to reach out to them to find avenues to help their children access opportunities and try to get buy-in from parents and families and communities to help as well. I appreciate the collaborative efforts on this bill. There's been many legislators who have helped, but we've also, as we discussed earlier, we've talked with USHE, with USBE, with Public Ed, with the League of Cities and Towns, and we've really tried to listen to each group and see what is best going to help them in the pieces in the bill. I just want to reiterate the main goal of this bill is to focus on removing barriers, ensuring fairness for all students, put in place common sense policies in state agencies and higher ed institutions to not have the submissions anymore, and prevent discriminatory practices based on personal identity characteristics. I want to thank you for your time, and I'll take any questions.
Does that conclude your presentation?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, we'll come back to the committee for clarifying questions and discussion. First, we'll go to Senator Grover.
Yeah, I had a question, I think, for Mr. Evans, are you willing to give input on what you think works about DEI and what does not work?
Yeah, I don't mind opining on that for a second. When you ask the question, what works about DEI, I'm going to start, or what doesn't. I would say one of the key issues against DEI, if you go back and kind of read the original intent for trying to get us to a place of equality of opportunity, there was a Harvard study that was done, and it was in 2016, and it was entitled Why Diversity Programs Fail. And some of the key points of that was that the original, the way that DEI programs were implemented was as a defensive posture against lawsuits. So you would have decision makers, the executives that would implement these programs. So if there was some sort of complaint, they would send it to, quote, the DEI office, or if there was a lawsuit, the judges were asking what kind of mitigation do you have in place? Do you have training? Do you have these things? And that's how the outgrowth of training happened. So it focused in on what can we do to win a lawsuit or kind of mitigate criticism. And it was never given the ability to actually focus on what this bill is focusing on, which is to make sure that there's true equality of opportunity for all. So many people that work in this field constantly report their frustrations about their limitations on how they can do exactly what this bill is doing. You understand? So the fact that this bill is addressing this issue and saying, okay, we're going to make sure that the information that policymakers need, in this case, these climate surveys, you get it, and guess what? These same decision makers at universities are going to be on the hook if financially if they don't address if there's an uptick in discrimination or harassment, or they're trying to not allow freedom of expression. So you, the policymakers, can then hold them accountable with the purse strings. And that's the level of intention of this bill. So that's primarily, I think what's wrong with DEI is that it's siloed and it's performative in many respects from the aspects of the leaders, not those that are doing the work, because they work very hard and they work with what they got. And I think this bill will give them more opportunities to do more as far as trying to address any kind of discrimination that may rear its ugly head. And so what's good about DEI, I think, especially coupled with this bill, is that in this study, it said one of the key things that decision makers need is they need to make sure that they respond better when they know that they're being monitored, that their actions are being measured, and that the results of that, in this case, like DEI, can inform what's working and what's not working. And then with respect to training that is done not under the guise of trying to mandate some ideological perspective, but in showing what works and what doesn't work in a data-driven way. So that's the good part about DEI. And again, like I said, the bad part is that, frankly, they have been kind of siloed and used as a defensive posture. And if you talk to many people in DEI, they will explain that to you, that their own level of frustration, because their hearts are in the right place and wanting to help as many people that need help. And so I think this bill actually can give an opportunity for that kind of coming together. And so I hope that those in that DEI space can understand that. Now, the only last thing that's what's wrong with DEI, and we'll say it as conservatives, is the name. We think that has become politicized, and so the name itself needs to change.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Reeby, you've got some clarifying questions or comments?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I do appreciate all the answers that you gave to my questions this weekend. It was very kind of you to spend some time this weekend looking at it. This is a new form of this bill, and I guess some of the stuff that I have problems with might be fixed, and I've heard from the State Board legal consultant that you've worked with them. So I still have a lot of questions about this bill, and I'm going to ask a few here today. So when we think about the word equity and we think about the word equal opportunities, What's the definition that you're thinking of with equal opportunities? Because I know we've had a struggle with the word equity, but they seem like almost the same. If a student is struggling with a home life and they come back and they had maybe a death in the family, we're going to give them equity or equal opportunities. We're going to go back, we're going to remediate, we're going to go back and figure out how to help them better, give them an equal opportunity, which could be equity. Why do we have to get rid of the word equity, and what's the difference with equal opportunities?
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
Thank you. It's not, and if you look at the language, it's not that we're getting rid of the word equity, it's diversity, equity, inclusion lumped together. And as Mr. Evans said, it's, I think, in an attempt to depoliticize this situation, right? As far as with equity, there's a lot of people that define equity as equality of outcomes. And so it's going to be, however, we haven't been super prescriptive with that part of it. I would hope that if an office still has equity in the name after this, that they would maybe clarify that that means equal opportunity, that we're open to helping anyone that needs it.
I kind of see your point. You are saying that this is making it less political, but really, without this bill, we would be less political already. So that's a little ironic to me. My second question is No Child Left Behind was a bill that we passed in 2002, which actually started looking at longitudinal trends. I went to see George Bush speak in California. He was talking about this bill was such a great thing, and I was a new teacher then. It was really hard to deal with some of the things that they were asking us to do, but I recognized that some of these outcomes were really to the benefit of people. So when we look at monitoring and measuring data of disaggregated students, are we still allowed to do that when we're starting to look at our students? Because if you look at all the data across the state, there is significant gap between different demographics. So can the State Office of Education still look to find out why we are having these gaps, or is this now outlawed?
That would not be outlawed in this. I think you can still look at data for sure.
To be clear, so I can pass out a standardized assessment, I can ask them what their race, their gender, their ethnicity is, and I can still receive that data back, and I can still look at that?
On those specific questions, it depends on the survey.
This wouldn't be a survey, this would be how they're achieving in school. So, for example, if you're a family that you have one parent, or you have different ethnicity than another parent, can we look to that to see why we're not succeeding at the same rate with those students as maybe somebody else?
And I'm not sure exactly how those demographic work with the question specifically that you're talking about, but I think the point of the bill is to say we can't just lump someone into a category of, you said single parent or whatever. It's to look at the individual and all of their circumstances on top of that.
So I'm going to give a random example, okay, that has nothing to do with person of color, but actually the color of my hair. I'm redheaded, and when I go into a medical field, I have to tell them redheads don't receive anesthesia at the same rate as people that aren't redhead. It's a crazy anomaly. So if I wasn't able to talk about this characteristic, I would receive different treatment that might be harmful to me. As we start to look at education, if we're not addressing the needs of the students who actually form a group in a longitudinal trend, we're actually creating harm by not meeting their needs. So that's why I'm asking, would we be able to look at a group of people and give them the equal opportunities that you're talking about?
Nothing in this prohibits studying those groups, but we're just saying you can't differentially treat them based on being in that group. Only, just based on being on that group, you'd take into account all of their considerations, right? Because you, as a redhead who doesn't receive anesthesia well, there might be another redhead who is just fine with that, but we shouldn't lump all redheads only in that if it's not universal.
Okay, I'm thinking it would be better to err on the side of treating me better than worse. So that's part of my problem with having these characteristics being not looked at, because we have longitudinal, lengthy studies of how these impacts our families and our kids and their ability to learn from where they're coming from and their backgrounds. So I'm going to move on to a couple of other questions, if I may. Thanks. On line 112, it starts talking about student groups and student organizations. And there are a number of student groups and student organizations who reached out to me and are concerned about the ability to have like a club that says She Tech, Women's Choir, Women's Hiking Club, a Black Students Council. Can we have these kind of groups that are tailored to something that I'd like to be a part of without somebody outside of my group? Can I do a student organization like that?
Yes, I know there's, people have asked about Latinos in Action and things like that, and absolutely they're not exclusionary as well, so that they don't exclude people that want to be in their group that aren't Latino per se.
So if I had a Latino in Action group and there was 10 of us that created this Latinos in Action group and 20 non-Latinos showed up and said they wanted to be a part of our group, we'd have to let them be a part of our group.
I don't think I'd like to speak in hypotheticals like that, but I would think that it could also be a cultural experience for anyone. I mean, if it's Latinos in Action is learning about the heritage and the culture, I wouldn't think that would happen, but
I can
I would
tell
think
you it
that
probably will happen if we wanted to get rid of it, wouldn't it?
I don't think anyone wants to get rid of it.
I would beg to differ. So then we have on lines 195, it says consciously and unconsciously. How do we measure somebody's unconscious feelings about what's happening to them? And we go over unconsciously and consciously a couple of times.
What line are you on?
It was on line 195 on sub 4. That just came out, so I tried to ask my questions with the most current version. And then it says after that, in that section on line F, it says should feel discomfort, guilt, or anguish. Well, I'm a teacher and I feel guilt and anguish that I don't meet the needs of some of my kids in that class. Would I be in violation of having that conversation?
No, I don't know that that's I'm sorry, and I appreciate the questions. On the consciously or unconsciously, those were related to certain words of unconscious bias and things like that. As far as feeling anguish or guilt based on, sorry, what was your example?
So I'm a teacher in a school. We actually look at the disaggregated information about who's learning and who's not learning. And after the year is over, and I look to see that the students in my class that are African American, Hispanic, Native American, Asian, coming from a single family, that they are achieving as high rate as I am, I feel guilt, I feel anguish, I feel discomfort. Should I not look at that anymore because I didn't do my job well enough, or I don't know?
I don't think that's a prohibited discriminatory practice that you are engaging in. I don't think you're pushing that onto them. So I don't think that applies.
How do I overcome that if I don't measure it?
If you don't measure your guilt?
No, the fact that they're not
Sorry,
succeeding. No, like, this is very nebulous to me. That's why I have all these questions.
May I, I don't think you're reading line 193 correctly. It says asserts that an individual, by virtue of their individual's personal identity characteristics, is inherently, in your example, you can be Black but not achieving well because you're in poverty. So you're looking at more than just the personal identity characteristics. You're looking at the entire assessment of that particular student. So you're not just making a decision on the fact that they're a particular race or gender.
I wasn't asking about 193, I was asking about 195, consciously and unconsciously. How do you measure unconsciously?
Well, that speaks to it when you were saying, in your example, it starts on line 193 about saying with respect to consciously or unconsciously, it's linked to just specifically your personal identity characteristics. not anything else. In your example, you included that they were poor and all of these other examples. So this is saying that specifically because they're Black or Hispanic or whatever, then it links to consciously or unconsciously. Your example included more than just that.
So if I've looked at somebody's, if I have a whole group of kids in a whole entire state at school, and I'm looking at the whole entire state, and I see that each kid, not them personally, but longitudinally, over many years, I'm seeing a trend. Why wouldn't I be able to use that characteristic to try to change my teaching practices to help them?
Because it's not just that characteristic, because then you're saying they're all the same. You have to look at everything that that particular group is engaged in. What if half of them are from single-parent homes, the other half are from two-parent homes, or whatever? Not all of them in that race are performing at the same rate. So if you then say all Hispanics or all Blacks, then that's what this is prohibiting. You need more data than just that. So what about their home life? What about, you know, are they from another country? What about, you know, so all of those things need to be included, and that's the effort that Representative Hall promoting you. That's what their focus is that it's more than just, and that's been a mistake I can speak from personal experience, has been when you then, the decision makers then say, okay, Blacks are this, Hispanics are that, and don't look in any kind of detail about exactly what's going on. And that's why we've had so many bad policies. So we have to look beyond that.
I think those are interesting things you just brought up, because where would I start?
Let's make sure we address these
Okay.
questions through
May
the
I
chair,
keep having
please.
follow-up?
All right, sure, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, may I have another follow-up?
Yeah. Okay, sure.
Great, this is a great place to start. So if you start with where a person is African-American, then you say, okay, let's see what else is going on in their life. Maybe they're from another country, maybe they speak another language, but we're really not allowed to look at their ethnicity either, or their origin. Is that part of this as well? On line 175?
Mr. Chair, I don't think it's not saying that you can't look at their ethnicity. It's saying you can't only look at their ethnicity. It's saying take into account the whole child, the whole student.
Understood. Okay, may I have one final question? Let me find it in my notes. So when we say on line 531, I think that's this latest version that came out right when we started, we talk about prohibiting training. I know that we have actually run some bills to have training here in the state. Would we be prohibiting training like MANT training and PSYOP training and letters training? Is that something that we would be prohibiting if we were going to prohibit training through an LEA?
Mr. Chair, that all it's saying is that the prohibited training cannot violate the prohibited discriminatory practices. So you'd have to take a look at all of those trainings, and if they violate the prohibited discriminatory practices, then there would have to be an adjustment made.
Thank you. This has a lot of questions. A lot of people are here with lots of specifics. And when we make laws, they should be specific, and they should have specific outcomes, and they should be measurable. There are many things in this bill that are nebulous, have timelines that are unclear, and have outcomes that could be detrimental. And so I appreciate the work you've done to bring in some of these changes that people have asked about. But when we think about DEI and we think about diversity alone, equity alone, and inclusion alone, those things are important. And we put them together, it seems like it only magnifies it. So I can't support this bill, but I do appreciate your work in trying to bring some better outcomes.
Thank you.
Senator Johnson, may I speak to
Yes,
something?
go ahead.
There's a few things that are prescriptive in here, but by and large, a lot of what we've done is not prescriptive, especially on the higher ed level, well, on any of the levels, because they've asked for latitude. They've asked for ways to do this, because every higher ed institution is different, the way, how many offices they have or how many divisions they have in this. And so we left it is a little open in ways, because we wanted them to be able to, and they asked for ways to handle it on their own based on individual institutions. So thank you.
Thank you. Senator Grover.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. I would like to know what Yushi thinks. I wonder if it'd be appropriate to have Jeff Landward come up, perhaps, give his, Yushi is the Utah System of Higher Education. He's our interim commissioner. I'd just like to hear what he thinks about this bill. It's been a lot of this bill does affect higher ed. I don't know if he's here.
Would you consider that part of your presentation? Is that?
I don't want to be part of the presentation per se, but I would like to know his input before we get to public comment. Is he here?
I don't know
Not
if he's
here.
here or not.
Okay, well, I'll try to come back to him later.
There he is, right there.
Oh, there he is. Okay. So I don't want to make sure. I want to make sure that's it's not part of the presentation because I don't think that. But I'd like to know what Yushi does think.
Please state your name for the record and who you represent.
Happy to. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jeff Landward, Interim Commissioner for Higher Education, here representing the system of higher education, our institutions, and the Board of Higher Education. I appreciate the time. I recognize how challenging this particular issue is, and we're grateful that the sponsors have taken the time to reach out and seek our input on the various drafts that have come forward and been willing to consider the concerns that we've had, consider fixes that we've asked them to take. We're committed to understanding the issue, understanding the concerns that the legislature's brought to us, that the governor's brought to us around issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Our vision in the system is that we provide every Utahn in every place and every circumstance an opportunity to earn a certificate or degree at one of our institutions that's going to meaningfully improve their lives. We are statutorily obligated to prioritize access and completion as a board to ensure that those are the things that we're working on more than anything else. So in our view, earning a certificate and degree on average for one of the households in Utah, just a single household, earning a certificate or degree on average will double their household income. The economy of Utah that we tout and point to is red hot, our remarkable growth. The workforce that we train as a system of higher education is the backbone of that growing economy. We say this because for the ongoing success of our state, every Utahn should have a certificate or degree. That's our vision. That's our focus. So the thing is, barriers to higher education exist. The data are unambiguous on this. We know that there are gaps in attainment. We know that of our high school graduates, over a third are not attending any institution of higher education or post-secondary education at all. That's bad for Utah. Those who are attending, on average, over half are not completing. They're going, but they're not getting a certificate or degree. It just can't not stand. So interventions in these barriers work. We know that they work. Where gaps exist, the board, the system, our institutions, we're going to intervene. We have to intervene. We're grateful that the sponsors have listened to many of our concerns and adopted an approach that allows us to continue increasing access to higher education, that allows us to continue to invest the resources into programs to ensure student success. So we're grateful for that approach. Other states have attempted to address this differently. We appreciate that our legislature is taking a different approach, but it is untested. And as has been talked about today, it's going to be difficult to implement, and it's impossible to know the challenges complying with this law will present until we start doing that work. I'm grateful that Representative Hall acknowledged that this is going to be a process. This is not a light switch that we can flip on and off. So I hope the legislature will extend us patience and grace as we collaboratively work to uncover the challenges and inevitably return for clarification, revision, and guidance, because it's just simply such a complex issue and so difficult to try and legislate a solution into this. It's going to take time, and we need to work in cooperation with each other to do that. To the extent that the law inhibits our ability to meet that common mission of increasing access, increasing completion, we'll be back asking for your help. Now, I want to also point out, not only giving access to higher education is critical, but providing our students with a marketplace of ideas is the whole point. Students need to be challenged. They need to be confronted with ideas that they've never heard before or that they previously rejected. Their assumptions need to be challenged. We have to make sure that we protect the academic freedom of our institutions to teach those challenging ideas and challenging issues, but also to make sure that we're bringing that diversity of ideas in that marketplace. We're going to vigorously defend the academic freedom to create that marketplace, just as vigorously as we'll defend our ability to work on issues of access. Now, lastly, I just want to say, how we do things matters as much as what we do. And even the best intentions, poorly executed, can have lasting damage. This is a contentious issue. But at the end of the day, our students, our faculty, our staff, including our DEI staff who are so committed to working on these issues, they're all human beings with real fears, real emotions, genuine disagreements, complicated assumptions. I hope that that continues to inform how we work toward resolving these issues. We will continue to work, and we remain committed to work on this issue with our legislative partners, with the governor's office, with our board, and with our presidents. But I thank you for the time.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to say we appreciate your leadership on the free speech initiative, the political neutrality statements that came out of the board. I personally appreciate your efforts in this area, and actually I know the sponsors have worked with you a lot, so thank you very much.
Thank you.